wish I could come up with the optimal equation for it. Sorry, that's not possible. But there are some general parameters. So there's two things that you're really talking about. Banks are also hoarding cash. And the way that they're doing that is that cash just sits in what's known as excess reserves. So that means reserves over and above what they're mandated by law to keep with the Federal Reserve. Okay, so those excess reserves actually are earning the banks some money. It's risk-free money because what they give us for our savings deposit or checking account is basically zero. They get 25 basis points on the reserves, so they make the spread risk-free. There's a lot of other stuff that they're doing, like investing in US Treasuries. That's also pretty risk-free, right? So they can borrow at a rate that's effectively subsidized by the government, right? That's really important. These banks are subsidized on multiple levels. The most basic level is the deposit insurance. And a more, in-your-face sort of thing is the policy of bailout. So you don't expect banks to fail. Okay, so they are effectively kind of quasi-government organizations. So it means that they can borrow at a very cheap interest rate. Indeed, they're borrowing almost free from the Federal Reserve during the crisis. So what do? You borrow, and then you got a choice as to what to do with that capital. One thing that you could do would be to make loans to customers that have reasonable projects that they're presenting, corporate customers. The other thing that you could do is to buy US Treasury bonds and make the spread. So borrow cheap, make the yield on the Treasury bonds. And effectively, that's what they're doing. They're investing in it's like an arbitrage relationship. That's how they can make money. And they don't need to worry about corporate loans or consumer loans. In terms of, like, obviously they're in that business, but they don't need to worry about growing it because they can make lots of money in the current situation with a positively sloped yield curve and subsidized borrowing. So that's the issue with excess reserves. As to what the optimal level of reserves, as you know, on Sunday, 27 nations agreed to the Basel III outline. I read the press release on Sunday, and it was, to me, like a joke to read the media coverage. If you grab Monday's Financial Times, they had a story on the Accords, and they got the math wrong. They got the reserve requirement totally wrong. Associated Press had it wrong. Later they corrected the stories, so the online Financial Times made the correction. But you'd think the Financial Times would be in tune with what's happening, something so important. It was just very, very confusing as to what was actually happening. The basic story is that the reserve requirements went up, which is a good thing because Basel II was a disaster. It was basically 2% tier 1, went to 4.5%. There's going to be a buffer of an additional 2.5% that's going to be gradually put on. So you put that together, 4.5, 2.5, you get 7. And then there is talk of another buffer that's unspecified that'll go on. And the idea is actually a good idea. And this is the idea of a counter-cyclical buffer. This is something that I favored. I favored the counter-cyclical buffer. And the idea is that in good times, the reserve requirements go up. Okay, so that's really important. So the one thing you know, if you're in good times, the one thing you can forecast with 100% accuracy is there's going to be a recession. So let's just keep on bumping those reserve requirements up, and then when the recession happens, you're ready for it. So that's definitely a good idea. There's talk also, and again, it's not specified, about different treatment for banks that are systemic, pose systemic risks. And again, this is a good idea. My idea earlier on was that you have a reserve requirement that that is different for small banks than big banks. So the bigger you are, the more systemic you actually are in terms of the risk to the system, the higher your reserve rate should be. And effectively, in doing that, it's really easy to do, actually, to implement. When you do that, banks will choose not to be that big, or they might even split in two. That'll be the optimal thing. So you reduce some of the systemic risk. So I think that those are some good ideas. However, a lot of the good ideas is very vague, and the implementation of what we know. So some of the stuff we don't even know, right? The stuff that we know, the implementation will be complete in 2023. That's a long time. We could have like 2 financial crises. So a long time. And again, you know, the U.S. supposedly was pushing for this. Germany dragging their feet. That's the spin. It's really hard to tell. The other thing that I should mention, and this is important, that's not just the changing of the reserve ratios. You have to actually look at what is considered equity. Okay, and the old rules, all sorts of garbage was considered, you know, something you could count in the numerator. Stuff like deferred taxes, interests in minority corporations, which could be, you know, special purpose vehicles set up by the bank. That was included as equity. One good thing about the U.S. stress test that we did was that they didn't do any of those shenanigans. So it was clean, it was tangible equity, and that's it. So it's not just the ratio, it's kind of what you're counting in the ratio. So those are, I think, some good news. You know, banks will, as you know, find ways around this stuff. They are in the business of making money, and it's hard to deal with this with regulation. We hope that it won't lead to a situation where it reduces the amount of capital that's available for firms that have good projects. That is a real risk, and we need banks to make loans, not stupid loans, but good loans. We need them to do that, and we need them to do it now. So you're kind of walking near the razor's edge on this. A little, if it's too stringent, then it's potentially going to cost you.